Before anyone could react, the beast attacked. It swung its claws, aiming directly at him, but he was quick to dodge. Jumping aside, he used another slave as a shield. The unfortunate man was struck by the beast's claws, his body torn apart in a gruesome instant. Blood sprayed everywhere, drenching him as he hit the ground, pinned under the lifeless corpse. Fighting to free himself, he pushed the heavy body away, but his relief was short-lived. The corpse began to move unnaturally, its skin stretching as something inside tried to break free. Horrified, he yelled at the nearby slaves to move, but their chains were tangled, leaving them trapped. The corpse underwent a nightmarish transformation. Its bones pierced through its skin like spikes, its nails grew into claws, and its face split open to reveal rows of sharp teeth. The situation was growing worse by the second. He realized this creature's ability to create a smaller version of itself was unnatural for something appearing in a beginner's nightmare, a terrifying breach of the usual rules. Determined to survive, he acted quickly. Wrapping the chain around the monster, he immobilized its limbs, but the beast thrashed violently, threatening to break free. He called out to the other slaves, urging them to pull the chain tight. Together they managed to restrain the creature, though the strain was immense. With no other option, he used the chain connecting his shackles to strangle the beast. Leveraging his entire body weight, the struggle was brutal, his strength waning with each passing second. Blood and sweat poured down his face as he fought against the monster's relentless power. Finally, the creature's resistance weakened. Its body went limp, and it collapsed to the ground. A calm voice echoed in the air, breaking the tension. It delivered a message he would never forget. "You have slain a dormant beast, Mountain King's larva." For the first time, amidst the chaos and terror, he felt a glimmer of triumph. The scene began with him collapsing to his knees, gasping for air. His body ached as if it had been torn apart, exhaustion and pain overwhelming him. Despite everything, a strange sense of triumph filled his heart. The beast, the Mountain King's larva, was dead. However, there was no reward, no magical item or weapon to help him in this dire situation. Even a coat would have been a blessing in the freezing cold, but he couldn't dwell on it. There was no time. 3 seconds, he told himself, just 3 seconds to rest. Regaining some composure, he looked around. The dead larva lay still, but its chain still bound him. Nearby, the 2 other slaves, one nervous and the other calm, struggled to untangle the chains to give them more freedom. Scattered around them were lifeless bodies and torn remains of other slaves. Some had escaped, running blindly into the darkness, but he knew it was futile. They would only meet a colder, crueler death out there. The Mountain King, the terrifying tyrant of this frozen land, remained out of sight, its massive form hidden by the fiery glow of the bonfire. But he could feel its movements, tremors beneath his feet, and the distant, horrifying screams of those still fighting for their lives. Suddenly, his attention shifted to something worse. Some of the mangled bodies on the ground began to move. His eyes widened in fear. "More larvae?" he whispered, horrified. 4 more creatures, just as grotesque and deadly as the first, rose from the remains. One of them turned its attention to him and the others, its sharp fangs clicking ominously. He had no weapon, nothing to defend himself. Desperation took over, and he wrapped the chain around his fists, ready to fight with his bare hands. Before he could act, a figure dashed past him. The young soldier who had once offered him water appeared out of nowhere, his sword flashing in the air. With one clean strike, the beast was beheaded. The lifeless body fell, and he stood there, stunned. The soldier, calm and composed, gave him a confident nod before turning to face the other monsters. But before he left, he threw something toward him. A small iron key. "Save yourself," the soldier commanded before disappearing into the battle. The key, a simple, straight rod with a slight bend, was the key to their shackles. His heart raced as he worked quickly to unlock his restraints. With a satisfying click, he was free. Rubbing his wrists, he felt a surge of determination. He could leave, but the sight of the other 2 slaves stopped him. despite his anger and mistrust, he decided to free them too. The nervous slave, overjoyed, laughed and danced like a madman. The calm one, though tense, thanked him with a nod. But the reality of their situation soon settled in. The Mountain King was still out there, and the freezing night was deadly. Running into the dark would mean certain death. Just as the scholar slave warned, the warmth of the bonfire was their only hope. The three debated their next move. The nervous slave wanted to flee, terrified of the beast and the chance of becoming one of the monstrous larvae. The calm one, however, reasoned that staying near the fire was their only chance, even if it meant risking the wrath of the Mountain King. He listened to their arguments but remained silent, his thoughts racing. The creature would not stop with just a few victims. It was a merciless force. If he wanted to survive, they would have to face it. Without a word, he turned and began walking toward the source of the chaos. "Are you insane?" the nervous slave shouted after him. "You're heading toward that thing?" He didn't answer, his mind set on one thing: finding a way to live, no matter the cost. The young man found himself facing a terrifying nightmare creature, a fifth-category monster known as the Mountain King. This massive beast was the stuff of legends, the kind of enemy only someone far stronger and better prepared could hope to defeat. But the young man wasn't a warrior or even well-equipped. He had no weapons, no powers, and no way to win a direct fight. Yet, if he wanted to survive, he had to find a way to deal with the creature. Nearby, chaos reigned. Most of the slaves were dead, their bodies strewn about the battlefield. A few soldiers remained, desperately trying to fight off the Mountain King, but it was clear they wouldn't last long. The monstrous creature, with its massive body and 5 ghostly white eyes, tore through its victims without effort. It picked up one unfortunate soul, crushed the life from him, and discarded the body like trash. Blood dripped from its jaws, a horrifying sight that would make anyone freeze in fear. Despite the carnage, the young man stayed calm. Shifty, one of the few survivors, looked at him in disbelief. "What now?" he asked, his voice trembling. The young man didn't answer right away. He was deep in thought, planning his next move. He knew he couldn't kill the Mountain King on his own, but he had an idea, an insane, desperate plan. As the creature continued its rampage, another survivor, a brave young soldier, caught its attention. The soldier shouted a challenge and threw a burning stick at the beast, momentarily distracting it. This gave the young man the opening he needed. Turning to Shifty and Scholar, he commanded them to follow him. They ran to a large wagon parked near the cliff's edge, its wheels held in place by wooden wedges. The young man explained his plan. They would release the wagon and push it off the cliff, using the attached chain to pull the Mountain King down with it. Shifty was skeptical but followed the instructions. Meanwhile, the soldier fought bravely, dodging the creature's massive limbs and drawing its attention away from the others. The young man worked quickly, finding a loose chain and creating a makeshift loop. He threw the loop, hoping to trap the creature's leg, but his aim went awry. Instead of landing on its leg, the chain tightened around the Mountain King's neck. For a moment, the young man froze in shock, unable to believe his mistake had somehow worked in his favor. Now, the plan depended on timing. Shifty and Scholar removed the wedges, and the group began pushing the wagon toward the edge. But the wagon was heavy and moved too slowly. The Mountain King, realizing it was being pulled, grabbed at the chain, trying to break free. Panic set in as the young man realized they were running out of time. Suddenly, the brave soldier threw himself at the creature, knocking it off balance. This gave the group a precious few moments. The young man joined Shifty and Scholar, throwing his weight against the wagon. He pushed with all his might, yelling silently in his head for the wagon to move faster. The wagon finally began to roll, picking up speed as it neared the edge. The Mountain King roared in frustration, its claws tearing at the chain. The young man watched, his heart pounding. The outcome would depend on which happened first: the wagon falling off the cliff or the creature breaking free. Every second felt like an eternity as the battle of strength and time unfolded. Would the plan work, or would the Mountain King escape? The young man's fate, and the fate of those around him, hung in the balance. The scene was intense as Sunny struggled with a heavy wagon, his body pushing it with all his strength. The oxen, which had once been strong and capable of pulling the wagon, were now dead. Instead, 3 exhausted slaves were trying to move the vehicle, but the progress was painfully slow. Despite the uphill battle, the tyrant Mountain King seemed to be moving much faster. Sunny, however, had more immediate concerns. He was pushing the wagon with every ounce of energy, trying to get ahead of the looming disaster. Meanwhile, the tyrant had already taken a swipe at Hiro, knocking him away. Then, with great effort, it managed to grab the chain wrapped around its own neck, a task that proved difficult for such a large creature. Its fearsome claws, great for ripping apart enemies, weren't ideal for delicate work like holding a chain. And then, the situation became even more critical when the rear wheels of the wagon finally slipped off the edge of a cliff, causing it to hang dangerously. The 3 slaves were thrown off their feet, and the wagon swayed, balanced precariously in the air. Sunny was the only one left standing. Without hesitation, he pushed his shoulder into the front of the wagon, putting his full weight behind it. Finally, with a screech of metal scraping against rocks, the wagon tipped over the edge, falling into the darkness below. As the creature made a move to attack Sunny, it was too late. The chain around Mountain King's neck tightened, yanking the beast off the edge, sending it plummeting into the abyss. Sunny watched as the creature disappeared, feeling a wicked sense of satisfaction. He had won. But his victory came at a heavy price. Exhausted and in pain, Sunny collapsed to the ground. His body was battered, his back raw from wounds, and the cold was creeping back into his bones. He lay there, questioning whether he had truly passed the trial. His body ached all over, and he could barely think straight. That's when Hiro appeared above him, looking calm and collected. Despite the chaos, Hiro was fine, his armor dirtied but intact. He reached out a hand to help Sunny up, but Sunny, too tired to speak, simply sighed and pushed himself to his feet, refusing any assistance. His body was a wreck, but he knew he had to keep going. The scene around them was gruesome. Most of the caravan members lay dead, torn apart by the attack. The only survivors were the 3 slaves and Hiro. The remains of the larvae that had attacked them were scattered across the ground, adding to the grotesque scene. But Sunny, despite the horror around him, was too worn out to care.